Hello and welcome to the Sitecore Commerce 8 powered by Commerce Server technical overview. My name is Mark Demeny and I'm a technical consulting engineer in Sitecore's Enablement Services Group. The target audience for this presentation is technical staff with Sitecore partners who are experienced in Sitecore architecture and implementation, as well as having a basic to advanced understanding of Commerce Server. This would include core Sitecore understandings such as item templates, search indexes, personalization either on DMS or XDB, and pipeline development. For Commerce Server, this would include its subsystems such as catalogs, customer profiles, and the marketing manager for things like discounts. For the agenda, we're going to break this presentation up into two sections. First, we'll cover the core concepts, such as understanding the advantages of using Sitecore together with Commerce Server. Architecturally, how Commerce Server and Sitecore fit together, including the overall architecture as well as Commerce Connect. And then lastly, we'll be looking at the implementation concepts. And in detail, we'll be looking at things like the product model, user profiles, search, facets, and indexes, as well as extending the solution through Commerce Connect pipelines. Okay, so looking at the core concepts here. First off, what are the advantages of using Sitecore with Commerce Server? And this does delve a little bit into some marketing topics, but it's important to understand at a high level what you're trying to accomplish by unifying these two solutions. Well, first of all, the Commerce Server catalog is immediately available into Sitecore. And what this means is that there's a data provider between Sitecore and Commerce Server. And one of the really nice things about Commerce Server as an architecture is that their item template model is very similar to Sitecore's item template model. And so you can be extending those item templates and you would create a boot product in Commerce Server, for example, and that would create a boot template in Sitecore, and you would be synchronizing the contents of those fields in those product items very easily between the two solutions. And so architecturally, things are very similar, and what this allows is that we've written a data provider to allow you to consume that information into Sitecore. Second, obviously, is those Commerce Server APIs. Commerce Server has been around for a really long time. There's a lot of work around those transactional processes and integrations with other systems through BizTalk. And so it's an enterprise level solution, primarily for B2C, and it's very stable, well-used platform. Now, of course, what Sitecore brings to that is the ability to use personalization. And so all of the things that Sitecore is good at, so personalization, engagement plans, rules, all of that automation, that can be layered on top of that core e-commerce content. And then, of course, going forward, there's a lot of newer interfaces. So, one of the disadvantages of Commerce Server going back architecturally is a lot of those interfaces are really Windows application tools. They can be distributed and they can connect to remote Commerce Server installations. However, not everybody's using Windows. Not everybody wants to be able to or can install those Windows applications. And so gradually Sitecore Speak interfaces will be replacing a lot of these tools. And so for the first version, we started with the merchandising manager. That's by far the most common operation, is to work with the commerce content itself. And so that's the first Speak application. Future versions of Commerce Server will be allowing you to do a lot more with merchandising manager, so bulk uploads and things like that. And we will be gradually replacing all those Windows application desktop tools. And the last is, of course, all the integration aspects with other parts of the Sitecore platform. So, using EXM, using PXM, using a lot of that search indexing methodology. And so we're going to be discussing search and indexes in detail as well. But from a technical level, these are sort of the prime, technical reasons of using Sitecore with Commerce Server. Okay, so now that we understand the fundamentals of why we're integrating Sitecore and Commerce Server together, we'll look at the technical understanding of how Sitecore and Commerce Server fit together. So first off, we need to understand Commerce Connect. And what Commerce Connect is it's really an integration layer that all Sitecore Commerce solutions are built on. Internally, this includes Commerce Server as well as the integration with Microsoft Dynamics AX for retail. And then there are a number of third-party integrations that are also being built on Commerce Connect. This would include UCommerce in Europe, and there's a number of partners developing integrations for systems such as Magento as implementations for clients. The reason and the reason this is really a best practice going forward is that it provides pipelines for most, if not all, of the e-commerce operations that you'll be needing. And there is a series on Commerce Connect of videos that's about 2.5 hours that really gets into the details of all of these pipelines. We're going to concentrate at a high level of those that are specific to Commerce Server. So you'll see here that I have product synchronization, and that has an asterisk, and it's not used for Commerce Server. Commerce Server is actually using a data provider to bring that content into Sitecore. So what this means is we simply don't use those pipelines around product synchronization. However, that is part of the core Commerce Connect product. There are also pipelines around things like carts, inventory, pricing, customer profile management, orders, shipping, payments, and wish lists. And there are also pipelines around some other operations such as gift cards and loyalty programs, which exist and are used by the Microsoft Dynamics AX for retail to really do that cross-channel marketing. It also provides a number of initial rules and engagement plans. And this is really how Commerce Connect fits into this core architecture. So if we look here at an architecture diagram, we have our default Sitecore installation, and we have our sample storefront. So this is an MVC front end, and of course the sample storefront is working off of Sitecore items as well as working off of Sitecore indexes, and we'll get into that a little bit further. Similarly, we have the merchandising manager, which is a Speak application. And again, same thing, it's working off the Sitecore items and it's working off those Sitecore indexes. As you're working with those products in the merchandising manager, it is going through the Sitecore API, which in turn is going through the commerce data provider, and that is in turn working with that catalog and inventory under the hood. Everything else is going through Commerce Connect. So all of those cart calls, so you're making a cart call, it invokes the pipelines, which in turn talk to Commerce Server. If you're working with another external e-commerce system, you're making those cart calls. It's the same API for making those requests. Similarly for pricing, it's the same API for making those requests, but you're just invoking different pipelines. And so in our case here, we have our core Commerce Connect pipelines, which do things internally in Sitecore. And then there's pipeline extensions for Commerce Server specifically, which make those calls to the Commerce Server repository and systems. And then going forward, or to the right here, we have integration services for things like Commerce Server staging, BizTalk adapters, and those desktop business tools, which of course we'll get into in more detail as well. Okay, so back to specifics around Sitecore Commerce powered by Commerce Server. So we are using Commerce Connect for all of those operations except for products. And I mentioned that the product catalog is using a data provider direct to Commerce Server. And this has a number of advantages. First and foremost is performance. And this means performance both at runtime and design time. And what we mean by that is if you're using product synchronization within Commerce Connect, you're really limited in terms of the size of that product repository that you can synchronize across. So it's a very expensive operation to be actually going to that external e-commerce system, making calls over SOAP, for example, and creating a number of those items and including child items within Sitecore. And so you're having to create and synchronize a fair number of items, and it's creating those items using the API. And it's a fairly slow process. And so you're often, if you're dealing with large number of product items, you have to really think about that synchronization schedule. And just in general, you're going to run into size limitations. At a certain point, it's going to take longer to synchronize the catalog than you have hours in a day. And so that's really one of the prime reasons for doing a data provider, is that you're really not limited by the size of a large catalog. You can have an extremely large commerce server catalog, and that is really pulled in essentially in real time within Sitecore, both in that Sitecore content management instance, and so you can work with that content in design time very quickly and easily, but also in runtime. So as you're navigating through that site, that content is being pulled into Sitecore and used through that data provider. The other big advantage is you can use a lot of those Sitecore tools. You can use the content editor, you can use the page editor, and you can actually apply presentation layers on top of those content items, and apply, because you can apply a presentation layer on top of those content items, you can do things like personalization on top of those content items and categories, and that's really key. Another big advantage of using the data provider within Sitecore is you can do some things in Commerce Server that Sitecore wouldn't natively support. So for example, you can have the same item, and that is the same item with the same GUID in multiple catalogs and categories. So unlike Sitecore native items where an item can only exist in one location and one path, and if you wanted to have that item exist elsewhere, you would have to do something like cloning, which really makes a separate item with a separate GUID. Commerce Server gets around this limitation because we're using a data provider. They can really cheat a little bit and allow it to do things and concepts that make sense in Commerce Server and actually do exist in the Commerce Server repository. We can do that in Sitecore as well. The other big advantage is strongly typed templates. So these are, this is a synchronized process with Commerce Server, but if you go into Commerce Server and work on a product schema and add fields, you can synchronize those field changes to Sitecore, and those fields will be added to the template of that item in Sitecore. And so it's very easy to configure products in Commerce Server. And similarly, you can also configure products and extend templates just in Sitecore. So let's say there's particular information that you don't want to have in your Commerce Server schema, marketing copy, for example. Templates can be augmented in Sitecore, and so you would only see that data in Sitecore, and you'd only work with that data in Sitecore. And so there are really two ways of working with that underlying template for an item. You can do it in Commerce Server, and at which point that field becomes exposed in both that Commerce Server schema and repository and in Sitecore, or you can just extend it within Sitecore, and at which point you would not see that field in any of the Commerce Server business tools. Now, one of the disadvantages of using a data provider is that you cannot use Sitecore versioning and workflow for publishing. The reason is this: the information is being pulled real time through that data provider into Sitecore. You're not creating Sitecore items, and so because you're not creating Sitecore items, you can't version them in the same way. And similarly, that publish operation relies on the creation of Sitecore items to publish those entries out to the production system. And so Commerce Server actually uses a different methodology called Commerce Server staging, and that's really the Commerce Server naming for a publishing operation. So there is this concept of publishing, and you can have a Commerce Server internal design environment and a Commerce Server published environment, but you would use Commerce Server staging to synchronize the publishing of that operation between those two environments. And that is hooked into Sitecore. You can see Commerce Server staging in your Sitecore publishing targets. It's just that it is a different methodology entirely. And it also, there is that naming of staging, which is a little bit confusing to Sitecore folks, which are often used to the term publishing. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the implementation concepts. First off is the product model. Now, as I mentioned before, Sitecore uses the catalog from Commerce Server exposed into Sitecore as a data provider. Templates are primarily managed in Commerce Server and then synchronized to Sitecore. If you have data that you only want to use in Sitecore, you can extend the template in Sitecore, and this data is lumped into an external settings field in Commerce Server. And this also includes other information that's very Sitecore specific, such as presentation details on that item. Now, catalogs, categories, and product data, namely things like the text, images, variants, relationships, and stock information, can be managed in Commerce Server Windows applications or the Speak Merchandising Manager. You can also use the content editor for editing simple text fields and creating things like variants, but it's generally recommended to use the Commerce Server Business Tools or, of course, the Merchandising Manager, because many of the operations, including things like inventory management, are not available within the content editor. They're really only available using those other tools. So now I'm here in Sitecore, and what you'll notice is that there's an additional section added to the Sitecore content tree. This is the Sitecore Commerce node. Now, if we start to go down this, you'll see a number of things like the catalog settings, and we'll get into some of the details later. These really control how some of that information is pulled into Sitecore. One of the other options here is this of product buckets, and this is really whether or not you enable using buckets within Sitecore. This is slightly different than the buckets that you would traditionally know of in Sitecore. The implementation is a little bit different, but the end result is the same. Basically, it enables search for navigation where you have really large content trees. Same rules and best practices apply. If you have more than 100 products on single nodes, then you should enable product buckets. This doesn't necessarily affect performance in the runtime. Really, this affects performance when you're navigating through that catalog within the content editor. Now let's look at catalog management. First thing is there's this catalogs item, and what this allows you to do is select catalogs from within the Commerce Server repository to be exposed into the Sitecore repository. So you may have situations where you have a number of catalogs within Commerce Server that you don't have front-end Sitecore sites for, and so you may choose not to expose all of those catalogs into Sitecore. This is very simple. As you add catalogs in Commerce Server, you will see them here as a checklist, and you can choose which catalogs to enable, and as you choose those then appear within and adding catalog items here in Sitecore. And so we have our AdventureWorks catalog selected. This is our default content for the example site. And you can now go down and look at the categories, and then products within the category, and then variants within those products. And again, these are all exposed as Sitecore items. Now, there's three major differences between these and Sitecore items. The first is around publishing. If I try to publish this item, you will notice that in my case here, I have a Commerce Server staging target. Because all of this is implemented on one machine, I don't actually have Commerce Server staging. So this is really something that you'd only see in a larger or production or test environment, where I'm moving content from one Commerce Server repository to another Commerce Server repository using Commerce Server staging. In my case, this is a local development install. I don't have Commerce Server staging, and so that's disabled. Similarly here, my publishing target of web is disabled, because of the fact that we're using Commerce Server staging for publishing this item instead of Sitecore publishing. So that's the first major difference. Is publishing is very different for that content coming from Commerce Server. Second major difference is that of versions. If I look at versions, you can see here that add and remove versions are disabled. Again, this is because versioning is not enabled, and therefore we're not seeing that in Commerce Server. Similarly, workflow is disabled for the same sort of reasons. You could apply workflow, but because there's no publishing link to it, there's really no point for doing so. And so those are the big differences between Sitecore items that are native items and Commerce Server items that are coming into Sitecore and being exposed through the data provider. Now, this is the content editor view. Realistically speaking, you're going to be using the merchandising manager, which is a Speak application that is optimized for merchandising individuals to create, update, and edit those product items in Commerce Server. Okay, so we're going to take a look at the merchandising manager here. And again, that is a Speak application within the Sitecore user interface. And there's a number of ways to work with content. You can either drill down through various catalogs and categories, or you can do a search that is within the user interface. And you can see here at every level that we're at, so if we're at the catalog level, I can create new catalogs. If I'm at the custom catalog level, I can do the same. If I go into a catalog, I can create new categories. If I go into a category, I can create new products, and at a product, I can create variants. And so the merchandising manager experience and navigation is very complete for that catalog and product management, those tasks. So if I go to departments and I'm going to go to a specific boot, so I'm going to navigate through these and go to boots. And I also want to point out that in addition to editing the fields for that product, so let's go to this Everglades product, I can edit all of those fields that are associated with that product here. I can edit the name, description, etc., etc. I have extended fields here as well. And I can look at the variants. Now you'll notice that on the base product, there's no inventory. And of course, inventory is controlled on the variant. And if I look at the variants there, I can see that I have inventory associated with that. And so this is really one of the fairly detailed and complex integrations between Commerce Server and Sitecore. And basically the Commerce Server rules for handling inventory, back order limits, stock out threshold, pre-order dates, back order dates, all of these fairly complex rules around inventory management are basically consumed into Sitecore out of the box, essentially. Now, one thing that you notice is if you go back into the content tree and go to that Everglades item, you are not going to see that inventory information on the content editor. And so for that reason, this is one of the big reasons why the merchandising manager is really where you should be going and where you should be working with content rather than the content editor, because the merchandising manager is very feature complete and the content editor is not, especially for complex things like inventory on that product. Of course, I mentioned you can also use the experience editor as well. And this is very much like the content editor. Really, if you're editing a lot of that product data, you should be going to the merchandising manager. But the experience editor does allow navigating through the site in that WYSIWYG experience, as well as editing a lot of those simple content fields. And more importantly, the ability to personalize and apply those personalization rules on various elements of content or various components on that page. And so that's really one of the key advantages is, for particular products where you really want to customize that experience and personalize that experience, you can now do so through the experience editor very easily. Next, we'll take a look at user profiles. Now, user profiles exist in both Sitecore as well as in Commerce Server. And there's a few reasons for this. This allows a number of complex relationships. So for example, you may have a B2B scenario where your user profile in Commerce Server contains the address information, but you may have a number of people logging into your e-commerce site on behalf of that single company. And those are managed as users within Sitecore. So in general, Sitecore manages the authentication and personalization, and Commerce Server manages the information associated with the order itself. So that is order history information as well as address information. And those two things exist separately for those reasons so that you can have set up one-to-many relationships. Now, you can do a number of things within your configuration, including mapping fields from your Commerce Server user profile to your Sitecore user profile and vice versa. And so we're going to go and take a look at how those user profiles are managed and created within Sitecore in that process. Okay, so to demonstrate that profile information and how things are stored in the two different systems, I'm going to go ahead and create an account. And so it's going ahead and doing that, and then we'll go and take a look at Sitecore and the user profile manager within that, and as well as the customer manager within the Commerce Server business tools. So first things first, if you go to the user manager within Sitecore, you can see that that user is now there. And if we go and look at that user object and look at the profile, you can see there's a number of fields for commerce here. And some of these are out of the box, and some of them are those that you can extend. And you extend that by modifying the user profile object and template in the core database. And so I'll just point out a few things here. The first is there's this GUID, and that is the user ID, and that is the user ID of that user in Commerce Server. And similarly, we have email address and a number of other fields, and these are really the fields that you can optionally choose to synchronize between Sitecore and Commerce Server. And as part of the training, you add an additional field here called Skype name. Now, if we go back to our Commerce Server customer and order manager, here I can do a search and find that object, and I can see here that I've got that user account that has been created. And if I go to this advanced tab, you can see here that we have these fields that are defined in your user schema in Commerce Server. And so we've extended it to add Skype name, and as well done some mapping and config files to map that between Sitecore and Commerce Server. Now, in the same way that we have an external ID in Sitecore pointing to the GUID of that user in Commerce Server, we have a external ID that corresponds with the domain and the username. So it's basically the account in and that fully qualified name of that user in Sitecore. And it's acceptable here to use that name instead of a GUID because this information is not modifiable. It's essentially as static as using a GUID. And so that's how those two profiles work together, that profile within Sitecore and the profile within Commerce Server. And you can see here that in Sitecore, you have all of your password settings and your reset, and all of that is controlled within Sitecore. And in that user account here within Commerce Server, I actually don't have any of that password information. And so that's one of the things that configuration-wise, if you're using Sitecore as the front end, is a little bit of a surprise, is that you no longer really need to manage that information in that Commerce Server account because Sitecore is doing it for you. Okay, this next topic we're going to spend more than a few minutes on, and that is search and faceted navigation and indexes. This is really important, especially in Sitecore 8, because of some dependencies on search indexes for XDB aggregation around contacts. And search has always been a big part of Sitecore. If you go far back into Sitecore, you've always had a Lucene index for the Sitecore master index enabling search within Sitecore. However, it's gotten a lot more interesting and a lot more complex, and commerce adds a lot to that as well. And so the first big question that you need to look at implementation-wise is that of Lucene versus Solar. And there's some pretty big fundamental differences between the two. Lucene is basically an index that can be enabled on a single machine. Solar is an index that is reachable through a web endpoint that can be shared across multiple machines, and that enables, first of all, sharing of indexes, but it also enables that indexing operation to occur off of your Sitecore server. And so often, and this is really something that needs to be considered in an architecture, often you'll be looking at Solar to be the search index provider for any sort of reasonably complex commerce implementation. The only time that I would really get behind using Lucene is that of a single server development installation of Sitecore and Commerce Server, where you're simply just working with local indexes and understanding it that way. For any sort of production scenario, for a number of reasons, mainly that of architectural flexibility and performance reasons, you would be looking at using Solar. Now, of course, once you have selected your search index technology of choice, the next thing is knowing that facets are enabled by default out of the box between Commerce Server and Sitecore. And so that allows you to easily use faceted navigation in your search results, and the solution storefront takes this into account as well. And there's a lot of ways that you can customize that faceted navigation. You can customize facets on a item type level, and you can customize facets on a category level as well. And that's really important and really useful and actually very easy to do, and you can do that directly in the Sitecore user interface. The next technology that's very useful to understand is that of computed fields. And this is used really to define ranges for things within search, and so that you can do faceted navigation on a range. And so for a really good example would be price. So, if you have all of your products and you choose to do faceted navigation on prices, you're going to have a whole number of facets come up. You're going to have a result for, $1.97. You're going to have a result for $3.27. You're going to have a result for $10.53, and you're going to facet down on each one of those, which is obviously not ideal. And so what you need to do is start looking at using computed fields where you can take that value and put that into a range. So, $0 to $5, 5 to 10, 10 to 20, 20 and up, that sort of thing, depending upon your business requirements. And lastly, we'll touch very briefly on the topic of custom indexes. And this is while Sitecore and Commerce Server ship with a number of indexes out of the box for doing specific operations, it often makes sense to look at creating custom indexes. And there's a really good example from one of the Commerce Server development team on how to create a custom index around order management, and then using that custom index for personalization around purchasing patterns. And so really there's a few concepts that you need to know. One, search is very key to core functionality within the unified product solution of Sitecore and Commerce Server. It's core to functionality within the solution storefront examples, which all work off that index as opposed to working off of the Sitecore content tree hierarchy. Computed fields are really important. Facets are really important and enabled out of the box, and that really goes a long way to making a good user experience to be able to find and filter and compare content on those facets. And so you need to understand facets, you need to understand computed fields to set up things like ranges specific to your business requirements, and then you can also bring custom indexes into the mix as necessary. So we'll go to Sitecore and we'll look at some of these things under the hood now. Okay, so we're going to spend a few minutes in Sitecore taking a look at a commerce server implementation with the example products coming from the AdventureWorks catalog, as well as the solution storefront. And what we're going to look at now are facets and navigation off those facets. So we're going to do a quick search here for boots. And there's a few things here that we're seeing, obviously, in the front-end implementation of the solution storefront, but a lot of this stuff is back-ended off of implementations and technologies that are core to Commerce Server in general. And so I want to point out here, we've got a few facets. We've got brand, rating, color, size, and these are all facets that you can then use for navigation. So once a user search for boots, we can then filter down to say, okay, only show me brown boots. Now, understanding this and understanding what facets are, let's take a look at Sitecore itself, and we'll log into Sitecore and see how facets are both applied to products and then used in various ways. So used for search navigation, both for driving navigation in the categories here, but also for driving navigation within search results. And then we'll take a look at some of the advanced things like computed fields. So we're here now in Sitecore and we're looking at one of those boot items. Now, if we want to modify the facets that we're seeing on that website, the solution storefront, we're going to go to the boots base template, which is in turn inherited from the commerce product template. And what we have here is a really clever implementation on just Sitecore. By adding some categories to standard values, we have these commerce search fields, and these basically dictate the runtime search facets that are displayed for those products. And in this case here, we can add search facets that are used across the entire product catalog. If you just want to do facets that are specific to individual products or individual product types, you can, of course, choose to do that. But this is obviously where you can go and you can implement this across the board. And so there's a number of nice things that the Commerce Server team has done to make your life a lot easier within Sitecore. And this is the first of those, is not only providing that as a reference presentation layer implementation of seeing more facets, but also building that facet technology from Sitecore right into the Commerce Server catalog itself. And so this is one of the early ways or easy ways that facets can be applied and used. Similarly, within Commerce Server, there's a few other things where facets are used. One of them is what's known as dynamic categories. And so if we're looking at the navigation elements within Sitecore, this is basically a static category, and this is pointing to a category data source. And in the same way that Sitecore has data sources to pull content from some other set of criteria for personalization generally, here we're using data source. So we have this item and this navigation within Sitecore. It in turn is pulling really navigation elements from that product catalog. If I add new categories to my navigation, they're going to show up here automatically through the virtue of the data provider. Now, the reason why I'm mentioning this in the context of facets is that of dynamic categories. And so this is a static category. This is really just pulling all of the categories that you're seeing from your Commerce Server catalog into Sitecore for essentially static navigation. As you add items to the catalog, they appear here. You can go one step further. You can use dynamic categories, and if we go to on sale items, you can see here that if we want on sale yes, this is using the facet and that faceted information to pull down dynamic categories. And our dynamic categories can in turn be used to drive that navigation that we're seeing on our reference storefront site. And so again, there's a lot of stuff in that reference storefront site that uses a nice fairly good best practice implementation to work off that underlying index and that underlying category. But in turn, there's a lot of stuff on the Sitecore site that has been baked into that integration between Commerce Server and Sitecore. Okay, so let's take a look at how some of that faceted information is displayed on both the solution storefront site as well as within the user interface in Sitecore. So there are a number of facets that are essentially enabled by default on that default commerce category. So you have things like brand, rating, and color and size. And so if we go back to Sitecore, you can see these facets also appearing in the Sitecore navigation. What we're going to do is we're going to add an additional facet, that would be the list price, and then we'll use that to explain how you can use computed fields within your facets. Okay, so we're here in the templates and we're looking at the commerce category base template. And if we scroll down and look at the standard values, you can see that there are a number of fields here, particular around search. And these are out of the box implementation. They tie in very nicely to the solution storefront as well. And these are things that you can use pretty much out of the box. So there's a lot of logic built into the data model, and a lot of that logic built into the data model is again also exposed on your front end site. And we can see here we have a number of runtime search facets, including the brand, the on sale status, and the product color. And we can extend that further by adding the list price. So now if we go through and we're navigating to any commerce category, you'll see that list price information there as well. There are a few other aspects here within the navigation. The tools are basically the merchandising manager as well. And if you scroll further, you can also see that there's sort fields there that can be used. So there's a lot of things that can drive a lot of that front end navigation built into that product model. Items per page is another good example here. So we can see 4 items per page, and we'll see that actually on our solution storefront site. So we've gone ahead, we've added that list price, and then we publish this change out, and we'll see that change in effect on the live site. So now if we look at Boots here, we can actually see that the list price is being pulled in and added to that page. Now, the interesting thing is, as I mentioned, when you were looking at list price, we're going to see probably an equal number of facets to the number of products that we have, given that the price is fairly unique to a product. And so we're seeing here, there's one boot that's $78. Great, we're getting one boot back of $78. There's another one of $87. Great, we're getting another boot back of $87. And so this is really where a computed field comes in. And it's the type of thing that you do to set up ranges for things where the individual values may be too unique to facet on. So we're going to set up a range for our computed field for price range, and we're going to segment by looking at the site. I'm ballparking, we want to have a number of different ranges, so 0 to 50, 50 to 100, 100 to 200, and 200 and up as buckets that we can basically lump those ranges into, and then that way when we're doing a search and seeing a number of products on our site, we can then facet down by ranges. So the last thing worth mentioning is custom indexes, and there's a really good example by Kieran McAuliffe on using a custom order index to basically track the last week's worth of orders and to start to do some relational mapping based upon that. So for example, mapping that to a persona. So people who bought lower end products can get results coming back showing lower end products. People who bought higher end products can get results coming back in higher end products. And this was demonstrated at Symposium and is also available as a video from the Hedgehog Sitecore virtual symposium series. And really what that is underscoring is using a lot of the built-in technologies in the Sitecore platform. So that is using the search-based indexing and the Sitecore Search API to easily, as well as the order pipelines, to easily populate that index and also easily consume that index in personalization scenarios. So often it's worth looking at using custom indexes and worth looking at things like the XDB to start to track and use that personalization information in the results. And that's a big part of this as well. So it's not something that's out of the box, but there's a lot of those frameworks already in place. So that Search API, the XDB API, the Rules API, and of course pipelines for feeding that information into those indexes. So next, let's discuss the Commerce Connect pipelines. And as we mentioned, there's a number of pipelines driving all of those e-commerce operations. And there's a few out-of-the-box extensions to those pipelines. So first off, in general, there's some card extensions in Commerce Connect, and this applies across the board, whether it's Commerce Server or any other e-commerce product that's using Commerce Connect as the integration layer. And that is the ability to be linked into engagement plans. So there's a number of engagement plans out of the box for things like cart abandonment, and Commerce Server and the integration, of course, does take advantage of those. As well as for inventory, there's everything is pulled in and using those Commerce Server inventory rules. And so the ability to define the Commerce Server inventory and how to behave for things like out of stock information and what sort of stock to leave behind and not sell and things like that, that all basically comes into Sitecore natively. Similarly, those Commerce Server pricing promotions and all that discounting that you would do within Commerce Server, again, that comes in natively through that pricing pipeline. And of course, the profiles that we looked at earlier, that synchronization between your Sitecore users and your Commerce Server profiles, that is all done, again, through those Commerce Connect pipeline extensions. Order, shipping, and payments, these really don't have anything particularly unique or special in Commerce Server. They're basically integrations, and for a lot of these things like shipping, for example, that's usually something where you would use BizTalk to do a shipping or payment provider. And similarly for things like inventory as well, there's probably a good chance that you're using BizTalk as well for inventory and any sort of ERP integration. And so basically we're just mentioning these pipelines and sort of outlining what things come out of the box with these pipeline extensions. But of course, given that they are simply pipeline extensions within Sitecore, and these are, I should point out, Sitecore pipelines and not Commerce Server pipelines. And so these are really the things that you get out of the box from that pipeline point of view as it pertains to Commerce Server specifically. So the last topic that we're going to cover is that of BizTalk. And to people coming from a Commerce Server world, they're probably familiar with what BizTalk is. To those people from a Sitecore world and not necessarily as experienced with Commerce Server, BizTalk is basically an integration layer from Microsoft that allows ETL operations with a number of adapters that exist on the market for things like ERP systems and order management systems. And it enables two things. One, it enables the ability to easily map data types from one system to another through basically XML configs. And more importantly, it allows these things to be transactional and failure proof. So, for example, if that external system is not available for some reason, BizTalk will store and queue those orders and ensure that those orders do eventually get to that other system. And this can be used for a number of different things. More commonly, it's used for things like order management, tax calculation, shipping providers, and things like that. But it can be used for a lot of different other operations as well. Now, do you have to use BizTalk? No, you don't. But the fact that it exists and the fact that it has a lot of those adapters and connectors already for a lot of those systems that you will be using, like order systems, tax calculation, and shipping, makes this worth looking into for saving yourselves a lot of time and effort on the implementation side.